Well, hey there. I'm excited to share that I finally finished my pumpkin planter. And I thought I would share the process with you because it was a whole lot of fun. It was really easy. And yeah, you might want to give it a shot. All you need is a plastic planter. It can just be one that maybe you're upcycling from a plant that you got at the hardware store. I actually bought a plastic planter from the hardware store. I was looking for kind of a good pumpkin-y shape. I don't know that this was necessarily it, but it was the closest that I could find. I am also using something called Celluclay. Celluclay is a paper-based clay that's activated by adding water that you can find at your local craft store. I would really recommend doing this outside. I've shared lots of videos, one recently, on using Celluclay, and let me just tell you, you should do it outside. If you're going to do it inside, maybe wear a mask or do it in a really ventilated area because you can see it's really dusty stuff. What I always do is break it up the best I can before adding water because it'll make kneading this into a clay a whole lot easier. And there's a direction sheet that came with it. I don't read direction sheets because I kind of go by the feel of it. If it starts to feel like actual clay, meaning it's not sticking to your hands, it's not super soggy when you squeeze it, water doesn't drip out, then you know you're good to go. If it's a little bit dry and really, really crumbly, add a little bit more water. So I made quite a big batch knowing that I was going to have to cover an entire planter. I often get asked, how much Celluclay should I buy? I say err on the side of buy less than you think you're going to need. It does expand. And the good news is that once you activate it and turn it into a clay, if you wrap it really, really well with some plastic wrap, you can keep it in your fridge, maybe plastic wrap and a Ziploc bag to really ensure that no air is going to get to it because air is going to be the enemy of this kind of clay as it is with most kinds of clay. So what I did with my planter, I found that it was easier to flip it over upside down. Make sure you have something covering your surface because once the stuff dries, it will adhere to the plastic and it'll adhere to just about anything you're working on. So that's why I've got a little bit of newspaper here. You don't have to prep the plastic. You don't have to sand it down. Celluclay will stick. And unlike regular clay, when you drape it over something, regular meaning kiln fired clay, if you drape it over something, as it dries, it shrinks. When it shrinks, it cracks. This kind of clay does not do that. So you don't have to worry about taking the planter out or anything like that. In fact, I've never done that. I don't know that it could actually support itself if you did. So just know that your planter is going to be forever the armature for whatever it is you're making. Once you've got this covered, you can go ahead and start working on the face or you can let it dry. The great thing about Celluclay, and I think I've started every other sentence that way, is that you can build on it when the clay is either wet or when the clay is dry. And I thought it might be a better bet to do it while it was a little bit drier, just because it would have enough time to sit up. I was afraid that if I started building too much clay on it, it might start to droop or slide down, which I never had any issue with that. And I think that's because I make it a little bit on the less so soggy and damp side. Once it was kind of sort of dry, I think I still did this on the same day, I started working on the face. So the first thing I did was I rolled coils, which are those long snakes of clay, and that were kind of like the indentations around the pumpkin, even though they're not indentation and they're sticking out, whatever that word is. Anyway, so I made a whole bunch of those. And with regular clay, you have to do slipping and scoring to get two pieces of clay to adhere to each other. With this kind of clay, you do not have to do that. You can just attach it and kind of use the back of my fingernail to kind of comb the clay over to get it to stick. Now, I have to apologize because I didn't get a lot of great footage of me building the face, but really I just rolled coils. These are the eyebrows to create the face because my big dumb head kept getting in the way the whole time I was filming. I didn't have my camera in the perfect place. And so you see, there's a lot of me in this, and I apologize for that. I was trying to figure out the placement of things here. So I kind of tentatively put a coil where I thought maybe the mouth will go, another coil for the bottom of the triangle nose. The cool thing is that I did end up moving things around and I could just pull those coils off no problem without damaging the clay underneath. If it helps you to print out something like I did, I've done these kind of vintage inspired pumpkins before. So I was looking at like 1940s era trick or treat baskets for my inspiration. So you could sketch it out, you could draw it out, of course. I just kind of went for it. And I don't know if that was the best plan because ultimately, I do have to say, I don't know how I feel about how I painted it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So there it is. There's the face. I've gotten lots of coils created, 3 triangles for the eyes and the nose. Notice that for the eyes, I kind of curved the bottom of the triangle to make it look a little bit more happy, like it was smiling. Long coils that were actually short coils connected to make the mouth. A coil bent into that of a circle for the cheeks. And then the last thing I'm going to add are some teeth. One thing I don't share in this video is that I also continued making those kind of ribbed lines that I added around the back side of the pumpkin. I add those on the face of the pumpkin too to kind of divide it up a little bit. So when this was complete, it was important that it did dry thoroughly. So I have had lots of people ask, when you work with Celluclay and it's finished, is it going to be waterproof? Meaning, I leave it outside? Is it safe to keep outside? Because the clay is water-based, I'm going to say no. I mean, I think mine would be okay if I left it outside and it was dry, maybe for a couple of days. But I think that clay, once it gets damp again, I'm not really sure what would happen, but I'm not taking my chances. I added some good old-fashioned SpongeBob teeth and then I let it dry. Next up was painting. So I really wanted my pumpkin to look vintage and old and weathered. And to get that kind of look, you have to layer the paint. And I made the mistake here of making a paint color that probably wasn't dark enough, but I guess it wasn't really a mistake. It was a good happy medium. I mixed orange with a little bit of black to get this kind of burnt orange kind of color. And when that was finished and I let it dry, I realized I needed something a little bit darker. So ultimately I made a very diluted dark color with a little bit of orange and quite a bit of black. And then when that was completely dry, I used what's called a dry brush technique. So meaning I had a nice wide brush and just barely put paint on the brush and kind of scrubbed the brush over the surface. This way you could still see a lot of the texture of the pumpkin. And then you can see it right there where I'm just kind of barely putting a little bit of color. I used orange. I used a yellowish orange and a couple of different kind of orange colors to really give it a lot of depth. And also I just wanted it to look very old and very vintage. So that was the look I was going for, which I think it really looks that way, especially on the face. I didn't really plan what colors I was going to use. I just kind of went by what I was thinking was going to look good at the time. So once this was completely dry, I started using black to go back over certain parts of the face. I used kind of a yellow for the nose and for the eyebrows, for the mouth also, and for the cheeks, I used a little bit of pink. Now, when I did that, I also made sure to use a brush that was, I'm going to say, not pointed. I like my brushes when I do this to be brushes that are kind of scratchy. So older brushes, keep all of those older brushes, even if they have paint stuck to them and all that stuff, because they make for great texture brushes when you're doing something like this. Anything with a really fine point is great if you're painting a lot of detailed stuff, but I wasn't here. So I wanted to make sure my brushes were nice and scratchy. And in between doing any sorts of layering, I would let my pumpkin dry completely so that the paint didn't smear. Ultimately, I think I got a little carried away with the painting and he was starting to look a little bit too perfected. So after painting this portion where he looks a little bit too perfect for me, all those lines are a little bit too perfect, I went back with a watery brush of black paint and I just kind of painted over the whole thing again once it was dry to really antique it some more. And the best way I found to do that was with some watery clay and one of those dry, scratchy brushes. I even got to the point where I was just kind of dripping the watery black paint down the rim of the pumpkin, and then I was pretty pleased with it. Now, what I wasn't pleased with was the dry, scratchy surface that Celluclay leaves behind when you're done sculpting with it. And it also made the paint kind of look a little bit matte. When paint looks matte, to me, it always looks really thirsty. So I decided to varnish the pumpkin a little bit, but but I didn't want it to get too glossy. So using a spray bottle and a little bit of shiny Mod Podge, I poured some shiny Mod Podge, here it is right here, into my spray bottle. You can see there's quite a bit of water in my spray bottle, and added that shiny Mod Podge and then really shook the living daylights out of that spray bottle before covering it with about 2 to 3 coats of that spray. And I left it outside just because of a little bit of odor and because I wanted it to dry thoroughly. Once that was complete, then so is my pumpkin. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. In fact, if you followed me, you know I've also made a skull recently. I went ahead and added a little bit of spray to him too so that he wouldn't look so dry and scratchy. So here I am trying to figure out the best hairstyle. I did add a removable plant so that I can always take it out when I'm not finished or when I am finished with this Halloween season. And let me adjust that hair. Oh, gosh, I'm yanking out here. Pardon me, plant. So sorry. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed and I hope you give it a shot. Toodles.